a name more recognized than that of any world leader or Hollywood superstar. Elvis. He sold more than 1 billion records, starred in 31 feature films, and appeared on dozens of TV programs. Elvis. He's been the subject of countless TV documentaries, hundreds of books, and thousands of newspaper and magazine articles. He is worth more today than he was at the peak of his career. Elvis Presley still generates well over $500 million in revenue every year. So much larger than life is his talent, fame, and influence that Elvis can never really die. In fact, many believe the king still lives, and his reported death in 1977 was the only safe way for Elvis to retire. For many years, rumors have persisted that Elvis is still alive. In a few moments, you'll meet private investigators, former federal agents, and Elvis experts who have startling evidence that the king still lives. August 16, 1977. The entire world mourns as we are told that the king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley, is dead. There were documents, the open coffin, news reports, an endless stream of mourners, and even a death certificate. But had Elvis left the building forever? The author of this book, Is Elvis Alive? Gail Brewer-Giorgio believes that Elvis staged his own death and is still alive today. In 1977, she began writing a novel based on this premise called Orion.
Well, it was August 16th, 1977, and I, like most of the world, had heard that Elvis Presley had died. About 3 days later, after writing several articles on Elvis for the newspaper, I decided to write a novel. It was called Orion. It's a fictional story of a superstar who hoaxes his own death. I wanted to try to capture the soul or the essence of someone like Elvis Presley. Orion was ultimately sold to Simon & Schuster. I received a large advance of $60,000. There was going to be a big PR promotion, etc., on this book, and the book was released. But a short time after it was released, I was receiving telephone calls that my book wasn't to be found. A lady from Pennsylvania called me, and she said that she had gone to the store to try to get it, and the woman who owned the store said 2 men in business suits had come in, bought all the books up. I called up New York. I would leave my name. They wouldn't call me back. You know, what was going on? I mean, why pay an author? You know, this is quite a few years ago, and $60,000 up front was a nice sum for a first author. But why pay an author and then you don't put their books back in the store? I mean, logically, it didn't make sense. Well, they wouldn't return my phone call, so I even called the distributor. And he said, they told me to pull the book.
Meanwhile, an investigator for the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department had an amazingly similar experience. His name is Monty Nicholson.
Gail Giorgio's book, Orion, and my book, The Presley Arrangement, were written at approximately the same period of time, at different ends of the continent. Gail Giorgio and myself did not even know of one another. And yet, we wrote the same identical facts surrounding the mystery of Elvis's alleged death from different independent sources. Other coincidences that occurred. My book, The Presley Arrangement, as did Gail's book, Orion, disappeared from the shelves shortly after it was published. When I questioned my publicists about this phenomenon, why friends of mine would go to a bookstore and try to order the book, and they would actually refuse to order it. He said in 35 years in the publishing industry, he'd never heard of such a thing. When I talked to Gail Giorgio, she was getting the same story about Orion.
Were the fictional stories in the novels Orion and the Presley arrangement too close to the truth? Almost immediately after Elvis's reported death, puzzling questions left unanswered began surfacing.
Why did the Memphis police officially close the files on the death of Elvis Presley before it was even medically or scientifically possible to determine why and how he died? Why were all the stomach contents destroyed pre-autopsy? Remember, this negates a thorough autopsy. Why was there never a coroner's inquest? Why was the Shelby County District Attorney's Office never officially notified to determine if there were any violations of criminal law? Why have all the photographs taken at the death scene disappeared? Why have all the notes prepared by the medical examiner's office, why have they disappeared from the official files? Why have all the toxicology reports disappeared from the official files?
Gail Giorgio obtained a copy of Elvis's autopsy report. Together, Gail and I viewed this report. In 18 years, I've viewed many autopsy reports, and I've been present during several autopsies myself. So I'm very familiar with what goes on at an autopsy, and I'm very familiar with what goes in an autopsy report. In these reports, they're very comprehensive. They give organ weight and size, skin coloration. They give things like the percentage of blockage in the subject's cardiovascular system. They give the coloration of the skin, the weight of the person, whether or not there's any foul play or any evidence of foul play. And usually these autopsy reports are 40 or 50 pages long, and they're very in-depth. The autopsy report that I viewed with Gail is 2 pages long. It lacks any of the significant information that is normally found in an autopsy report. And during the course of any normal investigation, this autopsy report would be incomplete and unacceptable. It's my opinion that a coroner that would even present an autopsy report like this should probably be investigated himself.
Many have suggested that the body on view in the open casket at Elvis's wake was not Elvis Presley at all.
People that went by the body in the coffin were heard to say that does not look like Elvis Presley. They were saying the nose is pugged. Elvis had a very classical nose. They noticed beads of sweat on the body in the coffin, and, you know, dead bodies don't sweat.
Gene Smith, Elvis Presley's first cousin, remained close to the king throughout his life. He also did not believe that the body lying in state in the open coffin was that of his cousin, Elvis Presley.
When we viewed the body for the last time, I stood there quite a while looking at his hands, and of course he was always breaking bricks with his hands. He had calluses on the bottom of his hand and big old rough-looking knuckles. His nose looked kind of puggy-looking, and his right sideburn was sticking out straight out looked about an inch. And his hairline looked as if it had been a hairpiece, something glued on somewhere. It just didn't look right. And his hands was just as smooth as a newborn's baby's behind, you know. And it seemed like it was sweating around his hairline. It could have been sweat, it could have been glue, I don't know. But I just didn't believe it was him.
Maria Columbus, co-president of one of the oldest Elvis fan clubs, was shocked by the news of Elvis's death. She immediately contacted Elvis's father, Vernon Presley.
And he asked us not to come out, that he wanted us to come to Memphis a week later. He said that it was too hectic, there were too many people, the press was there, all family members that they had ever acknowledged were coming to Memphis, and that it would be more quiet and more beneficial for us to talk to him a week later. So we agreed. We arrived the next week, and the whole feeling of it was a feeling of make-believe. It was unreality. When we went to the mausoleum, it was an atmosphere of a carnival. There were people selling popcorn and soft drinks. There were people running up and down, and people standing in front of the doors of the mausoleum posing for pictures with the security guards. It didn't feel real. It felt like it was a game. And we didn't feel that Elvis's spirit was there. We felt a coldness and like it was a big joke. That was the week that we saw a copy of the inventory of Elvis's estate. It was 84 pages long, but it was 84 pages too short. There were a lot of things that were missing that should have been there. This was an inventory of everything that was in Graceland at the time. And there were no photographs of his mother listed, no photographs of his daughter. His diaries were missing. Most of his jewelry was gone. He had maybe 5 pieces of jewelry listed, and everybody knows Elvis loved jewelry, and he had a tremendous amount of rings and watches and necklaces, pendants. None of those were there. Some of his cars were missing. A plane was missing. It was unbelievable. And we were talking to fans who were still there, who had seen Elvis lying in state, and they said it didn't look like him.
And the gravesite itself raises questions in Maria's mind.
Vernon spelled Elvis's name on the gravestone with 2 A's, even though he officially changed the spelling of his name on his birth certificate from 2 A's to 1 A. Also, Elvis went by 1 A. He signed his contract with 1 A. His marriage license had 1 A. His army papers had 1 A. Another thing that's unusual is the position of the burial plots. Elvis is not placed next to his mother. He is between his grandmother and Vernon. That is not what Elvis wanted in the first place. And the fans have been commenting about this quite a lot.
But was there proof Elvis was still alive? About 4 months after Elvis's reported death, Mike Joseph and his family drove to Graceland to view and take photos of Elvis's grave.
It was New Year's Eve, '77, when I took my wife and my son and my nephew down to Graceland. They had just opened up Memory Gardens where Elvis was laid to rest. And we were there for an hour, and we left back for home. Had the pictures developed, and looked at them, put them away. One day after reading a book, I decided to look at my pictures again. I pulled them out, and this time I saw something in one of the pictures that I hadn't seen over the years that I was looking at them. Of course, I wasn't really studying them, but the sun had just hit on this picture in such a way that it picked up this image sitting in the doorway, a shadow in the doorway. For curiosity's sake, not that I'd know who was there, I wanted to see what it was. I took my son's magnifying glass, put it on the picture, started pulling it away from the picture to get a good visible view of it, and I was just shocked. I could not believe what I saw. My God, I had Elvis Presley sitting in the doorway, looking out at the fans walking past his grave. I've had the negatives examined by Kodak. And Kodak basically says that they are original. They have not been tampered with in any way. They were taken in sequence, uncut by the negatives, being original. They can tell. The emulsion number of the film was manufactured in '77. Each roll of film that is manufactured has a manufacturing date on it in the emulsion number. You couldn't pay Kodak to say something like that if it weren't true. This is the first shot that we took. We couldn't go near the house. This is a security guard's car. It was sort of makeshift then because it was too early. It wasn't really opened up as a museum yet. So the house was closed to the public. This is Elvis's headstone, and right here in the corner is his mother. So this show that was taken after August 1677. and before 79 when his father died, because his father would be right over here, and 80, his grandmother, Minnie Mae. This is the shot that I took of the people walking and the bathhouse in the distance. We zero in here, and this is the same shot with just the chair. No one sitting in the chair. So that shows it was not a picture of someone sitting in a chair. He liked that chair. That was one of his favorite chairs. He even got his haircuts in that chair at times. This is the view he would be seeing. He would be seeing us sitting there and the people walking past his headstone. This is my son once again blocking the doorway, and of course the picture where I first spotted the silhouette in the doorway.
Monty Nicholson also saw a picture, allegedly taken after Elvis's death.
I had a co-worker who in passing one day told me that he used to work for Elvis Presley, and he had some pictures that I might be interested in. Well, one day he showed up at work and he had pictures of Elvis Presley getting in a helicopter that, for all intents and purposes, looked like a government helicopter, and there were men surrounding Elvis also getting into the helicopter who looked like what we often see depicted as government agents with the blazers and the wire in their ear and whatnot. And it was an interesting picture, although that picture in itself was not particularly suspicious because it's common knowledge Elvis was involved as an honorary police officer with many police agencies all over the country. The interesting thing, the curious thing about the picture was this individual claimed this picture was taken several hours after Elvis allegedly died at Graceland Mansion. So I looked at the pictures with a natural curiosity and began to work with the idea of writing a novel. While I was researching this novel, I had a running conversation with the guy that showed the pictures to me for probably 6 or 8 months that we worked together. He quit the department and was gone for several months, and I didn't think much about him. He had the pictures in his possession. I didn't have the pictures, and there was no actual way for me to verify the validity of the date of the pictures, but at the time I was only writing a fiction novel and I didn't need to. So it wasn't important in my mind to verify the date. But later, as I gained more and more information, I decided it might be important to see if I can find some factual way of verifying the date those pictures were taken, because I might really be on to the modern mystery of our decade. So I tried to recontact this individual, and when I found him, he denied ever showing me the pictures. He denied any past affiliation with Elvis Presley. And I told him at the time, I said, wait a minute, I'm not crazy. I remember our conversations, and I remember them very well, and I need to meet with you and talk to you about this. Are you willing to do that? He agreed. He gave me an address and a phone number where he might be contacted, and we agreed upon a date and a time for an appointment. The address he gave me was a vacant house, and the phone number provided was a disconnected number. And I have never been able to find him since. I have no idea where he is at or the pictures. But I know that this event occurred, and I've been an investigator for 10 of the last 18 years that I've been a policeman, and I know that my powers of perception and reason are working very well, and that I didn't imagine what happened to me.
Another unusual fact surfaced when Gail Giorgio began researching Elvis Presley's involvement with law enforcement.
He had always had a love of law enforcement. He had he was a bonded deputy with the Memphis police. He was connected with, the Denver police in Colorado.
Denver police, yes.
He was connected
California.
with the LAPD. So his interest in law and order went back many, many years, and in fact, when he was voted the most outstanding young man in America by the JCs, it was for his work also in drug enforcement. So he was sincere in wanting a federal badge, and he wrote Nixon a letter on the airplane, American Airlines, and offered his services as an agent at large. He said basically because of who he was, he could probably get to people that other people could not get to.
Elvis wrote this letter to then-President Richard Nixon while on an airplane headed for Washington, D.C. Dear Mr. President, first, I would like to introduce myself. I am Elvis Presley and admire you and have great respect for your office. I talked to Vice President Agnew in Palm Springs 1 week ago and expressed my concerns for our country. The drug culture, the hippie elements, the SDS, Black Panther, etc., do not consider me as their enemy, or as they call it, the establishment. I call it America, and I love it. Sir, I can and will be of any service that I can to help the country out. I have no concerns or motives other than helping the country out. So I wish not to be given a title or an appointed position. I can and will do more good if I remain a federal agent at large. I will help, but by doing it my way, through my communications with people of all ages. First and foremost, I am an entertainer, but all I need is the federal credentials. I am on the plane with Senator George Murphy, and we have been discussing the problems that our country is faced with. So I am staying at the Washington Hotel, room 505, 506, 507. I am registered under the name of John Burroughs. I will be here for as long as it takes to get the credentials of a federal agent.
I was told that if I checked this letter against Elvis's death certificate, which obviously had to be filled out, quote, after he died, I would find out that Elvis Presley filled out and signed his own death certificate. Now, this is incredible information. I mean, this is mind-boggling when you think about it. It's never been revealed, and I can tell you that I was told by a member of the family to have it checked out.
Gail took the death certificate and items written by Elvis to Paul Wiest, a certified graphologist who specializes in investigating forgeries.
I was asked by Gail Brewer-Giorgio to examine some handwriting of Elvis Presley. She supplied me with a copy of a letter written to President Nixon in 1970 and the death certificate or medical examiner's report at the time of his reported death. I examined these two documents and compared them by measuring the slant of the handwriting, the spacing between the letters, spacing between the words, the size of the letters, and the individual letter formations. I also made transparent photocopies where I could lay one photocopy, a transparent copy on top of another one for close comparison. I examined these under transmitted light with a light table. The result of my examination was that I found that the slant matched on both documents, that the size of the letters was the same, the spacing between the letters was the same, and many of the individual letter forms were the same. My conclusions after this exhaustive examination was, in my professional opinion as a document examiner, that the same person who wrote the letter to President Nixon also wrote the Elvis Presley death certificate or medical examiner's report of Elvis Presley's death.
But the question still remains. Why would Elvis Presley fake his own death? Was it simply so he could retire from the limelight? Perhaps, as many believe, was it because of Elvis's involvement in state and federal affairs, such as the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency? It was in 1970 when Elvis received a federal badge from President Richard M. Nixon.
We know that it's not a token badge because, there was an article by Jack Anderson in the Washington Post that told about Elvis being sworn in as a federal agent. I think Elvis purposely low-keyed his role as a government agent for the effectiveness in acting in an undercover role.
Maria Columbus was also researching Elvis's life.
I had toured Graceland, and I had noticed in the trophy room a certificate of appreciation from the government to Elvis. And so I wrote to that particular bureau and asked, why was this given to Elvis? This was in 1982. And I received an answer from a Mr. Pritchett, saying that Elvis had provided cover for an undercover narcotics agent from the years of 1974 through 1976. The man was a musician and posed as part of his band.
Elvis is connected also with President Carter. We know by several biographies that 2 weeks, I believe, prior to August the 16th, the FBI arranged a telephone call with Elvis and President Carter. Not only do we have Elvis connected with 2 United States presidents, I don't know about you, but I don't think I'd get an appointment that easy. And I think if I wanted to call, say, President Carter, I couldn't really call the FBI and say, would you put a call through? This is the kind of clout Elvis had, but his clout run in a very official way. He was a federal agent. There's no doubt about it. I mean, I have read 663 FBI files on Elvis Presley, and his life was in danger. It's clear by the FBI reports. There were serious assassination threats made against him.
Recently, Gail Giorgio and myself viewed FBI documents obtained by Gail. In these documents, Elvis was the subject of numerous death threats. Some of these threats came from well-known underground figures, and it was also common knowledge that an undercover agent traveled as one of Elvis's band members. It's because of this affiliation that Elvis had with government agencies, because of these death threats, and the fact that this agent traveled as one of his band members, that lead us to believe that the strong possibility exists he may very well be a part of the witness protection program. But being a member of the law enforcement community myself, this prevents me from ever undermining any efforts of another law enforcement agency. And it also prevents me from telling you the answer to this question, which I know is the truth.
Yet, if Elvis Presley were alive, many questions still needed to be answered. It was Monty Nicholson's investigation which started to unravel the mystery.
One of the questions I asked myself while researching the Presley arrangement was, if Elvis did indeed fake his death, how would he support himself? He would need money. 3 facts came to light when I began to research this question. My sources tell me that in March of 1977, a full 3 months before Elvis died, he cashed in 3 life insurance policies for just shy of $2 million. Shortly after his death, fact number 2, there was a checking account, a private checking account, with an excess of $1 million that vanished and has not been explained as yet. Third fact, there's still a remaining insurance policy that is yet to be cashed. What is the significance of this? It's just this. The 3 life insurance policies that were cashed were paid up. There's no fraud involved. Those life insurance policies are owned by the insured. The third policy, or the remaining policy, I should say, was not paid up. If a surviving heir would cash in that policy and the person who was insured were still alive, that would be insurance fraud. The checking account I can't explain. It vanished. $1 million vanished. Is Elvis still alive? The feasibility certainly seems to be getting stronger.
Gail Giorgio and others believe that Elvis is alive and well and living in Kalamazoo, Michigan.
There was a newspaper article actually in Kalamazoo right before August 16th of 77, and it said that Elvis visited Kalamazoo incognito. But he had been seen there, and there's been some jokes, Burger King, shopping malls, etc. And people, I don't know if they actually believed it or it was just a joke or they thought they saw. But what happened was that I had received a telephone call some years ago from a woman who was a nurse at a hospital in New York City. And she said that Muhammad Ali had been a patient there. And while at the hospital, she said a man who looked identical to Elvis Presley visited Ali. Now, most people do realize that Muhammad Ali and Elvis were very, very close friends. They saw each other. He would visit Ali at his training camps and so forth. But there wasn't too much I could do about the information because it wasn't verifiable. Then, I guess a couple of years ago, I received a telephone call and a letter from a woman from Ohio, and she had a copy of the Cincinnati Post, and she said that when Ali was leaving the hospital, it was a UPI story, leaving the hospital, he left with other men. It was on a Thursday night that they had left. And one of the men was Jesse Jackson. There was another unidentified man with Ali, and a fourth man who was captured. And it looks identical to Elvis Presley. The negative to that picture has disappeared, but the picture did appear in the newspaper, and I managed, of course, to get a copy of it. We sent it to experts who do facial analysis and so forth, where they compare it to other pictures of Elvis, and it matched up. They said, they tried to find flaws, but they couldn't. I mean, they measure nose to lips and the whole thing. And so they verified that it was Elvis Presley. And in November of '89, Ali was shown the picture, and he also verified that it was Elvis Presley. It was actually, the picture was even shown to to Billy Stanley, one of Elvis's stepbrothers, and he verified also that it was Elvis Presley. Now, what's interesting about this, tying this into Kalamazoo, is that Ali lives right outside of Kalamazoo. He lives in Berrien Springs, but he uses the Kalamazoo postmark. It's always stamped on all his envelopes. So therefore, when you put it all together, the sightings begin to make sense.
In 1980, Maria received a tape from another Elvis investigator, Stephen C. Chances. The tape was a recent recording allegedly made by Elvis Presley. Gail Giorgio decided to find out if the recording was authentic.
Even though it was called a monologue, it really wasn't. He had been talking over the telephone to somebody, and whoever he was talking to edited themselves out. But I finally contacted a voice authentication expert who works with the government, and he's with a major law enforcement agency in Texas by the name of L.H. Williams.
Gail had sent me a copy of a transcript of the tape recording of the unknown person, and this was 4 pages long. In this process, I also requested copies of known tape recordings of Elvis Presley, and I followed the guidelines that were established during the Watergate case for possible authentication of the tape recording. I selected the same words and phrases of the known and the unknown person for comparison purposes. This is the known sample of Elvis Presley stating the word music. This is a sample from the unknown tape recording showing the word music. The formats that were formed fall within the same frequency range through here, which would indicate a match. Basically, the known voice of Elvis Presley compared with the voice on this tape is the same.
What was said on the tape became even more meaningful to me. The more I listened to it, the more I became aware of how sensitive Elvis was, how caring a person he was. He said things like this.
I started traveling all over the world, and it's been It's been enjoyable, but it's been a constant battle of growing beards and this and that to keep from being recognized. Anyway, the first place that I wanted to see in Germany was a place called Wiesbaden. I don't know whether or not you've ever seen Wiesbaden before, but my girlfriend was with me, and we went to a place to get something to eat. And a waitress there asked me what we'd like to have. And I said, I don't know really. What would you suggest? And she stood still. She just kept staring at me, and I started getting very nervous. At the time, I had a beard and I lost a few pounds, and I thought it would be very, very hard for anyone to recognize me. And then she asked me if I'd ever been to Germany in the past, and then I got more nervous. But she said, you know, I never forget a face. And then she said, I don't know how you did it. She said, I don't care how you did it. She said, I just hope that you're as happy as you've made me tonight.
If this tape was indeed Elvis Presley, it would mean that Elvis had gone back to Germany, the same place where he served in the U.S. Army back in 1958. After writing numerous articles and books, Gail is encouraged by her readers' reactions.
On balance, very, very positive. It's just one more piece of an incredibly complex mosaic. I mean, it's impossible, totally impossible, to digest all of this information. You could do a 10-hour documentary. It wouldn't be long enough. I mean, there's tapes, pictures, phone calls, handwritten letters, the government connection, FBI papers. You know, you could just go on and on and on. There's so much. You know, it is mind-boggling, but sometimes it disturbs me because there are critics out there that won't even take the time to look at all this evidence. If my critics would come to my office and spend a couple of years, there's no way they could leave that office and not ask the question, is Elvis alive? When Ross Schaefer of Late Night conducted a poll, he conducted a poll and received 30,000 phone calls on the question, do you believe Elvis Presley is alive? And after their viewers had seen just some of the evidence, he was shocked, stunned to report that 84% of the people believed Elvis Presley was alive. Now that's been the reaction of every poll that has been conducted when the evidence is shown. This is the numbers. 84% do believe Elvis Presley is alive.
Another piece of the puzzle occurred in the form of a phone call Gail Giorgio received late one night.
On October 10th, 1988, between 2:30 and 3 a.m. in the morning, I received a telephone call from a man who identified himself as Elvis Presley. And although my equipment was very, very bad, I managed to tape the call.
Anyway, I just got a word. The guy just gave me his hand, so I mean,
Okay.
I know you're going. It's been a pleasure. I hope that people treat you kindly and everything.
Well,
I know they can be very cruel. It's even worse. I thought they were cruel to me when I was a kid, but compared to today, they were nice back then.
yeah, I know.
Well, they're very cruel.
Well, you may have to help me out because a lot of people are.
But don't you worry. I mean, people like you and this whole people, you'll have a lot to laugh.
I know. I'm going to have.
And I can sit back here, but you can sit there and say, well, I wish that was true. So I can sit back and say, I know it's true. Unless something dramatic happens. But see, I know what's going to happen. All right, man, it's very nice talking with you, and I hope good luck with your writing career and everything.
Well, thank you.
But God bless you. It's great.
Okay. You too.
God will take care of us all.
That's true.
Whatever card he deals us, we're going to have to play it.
That's right.
So God bless you, man.
Well, thank you.
Have a good night now.
Is Elvis really still alive? There seems to be enough evidence indicating he could be. Elvis's handwriting appears to be on his own death certificate. There are questions regarding Elvis's body from not only fans, but his own cousin as well. So whose body was in Elvis's coffin? The autopsy reports and official investigations into Elvis's death seem to pose more questions than answers. Elvis's grave placement itself is questionable. He has allegedly been photographed on at least 3 separate occasions after the date he was supposed to have died. Just prior to his reported death, he cashed in 2 life insurance policies. A third policy has still never been collected by any of his heirs. Is this because they know he's alive and wish to avoid insurance fraud? A checking account with $1 million, some cars, jewelry, and a private jet plane all vanished, either just prior to or just after Elvis's reported death. Elvis had gotten a Drug Enforcement Agency badge and allowed a government agent to pose as a member of his band between 1974 and 1976. Did his involvement with the DEA force the king to hoax his own death? Monty Nicholson believes this theory makes the most sense.
In an effort to help someone close to him who may have been involved in drug trafficking themselves, Elvis might have become a victim of extortion himself. Extortion is a common thread that binds all of the FBI reports we've seen. And it's very possible, were Elvis a witness for any drug enforcement agency, it would be necessary to protect him afterwards.
But if Elvis is a part of the federal witness protection program, neither Nicholson nor another Elvis researcher, Paul Bishop, will say. Bishop, a 14-year Los Angeles Police Department veteran, will say only this.
Well, we know that Elvis had numerous contacts with the Drug Enforcement Agency on a positive basis, and that he was very pro-law enforcement, and that he had always offered his help for whatever their needs may be. As to whether or not he is now part of the Federal Witness Protection Program is something that even if I knew the answer to, I wouldn't tell you if he was indeed involved in the program, because it would totally negate anything that's being done to protect the man.
It has been over 13 years since Elvis's reported death, and still too many questions remain unanswered for too many people. The Elvis Files have yet to be closed.
Hear the evidence. Listen to Elvis's 1988 phone call. Earlier in this video, you heard part of the October 10th, 1988 telephone conversation between Gail Brewer-Giorgio and Elvis. Now you can hear more of the conversation and decide for yourself if it really is the king. Just dial 1-900-988-ELVIS. Call now. Listen to Elvis speaking with Gail. Ask any question of Gail. Leave an opinion on the mysterious revelations regarding the king's death. Also, hear what others have to say.
Thank you.